Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our improv webinar where we're trying to stump the FME experts. So my name is Dale Lutz. I'm one of the co-founders of Safe Software, and I'm joined by a host of the FME experts here today who have been busy studying all these questions that have been pouring in over the last while. And boy, oh boy, I was commenting earlier, these are not the questions we used to get 20 years ago. They are pretty sophisticated. So why don't I ask the team to introduce themselves? I'm not sure. Maybe we can try to go alphabetically by first name and you guys can self-sort.
That means I'm up. I'm Brian Pont. I'm the support manager here at Safe Software. So if you're working with anyone on our team technically with FME and trying to get some wins and success, that's our group. And we're really excited today to work with everybody. Now I'm going to pass it off and leave it open so whoever's awake can figure it out who's next.
To me, I am Chris, and I'm on the FME Technology Experts team. So I'm part of that group that helps customers out, sorting out their answers and making sure they have the resources they need.
Okay, I was going to do that like a producer, like I'm playing normally.
I was thinking that as well.
My name's Jen. I've been a server expert at Safe for about 3 or 4 years now, but I've recently transitioned to learning all about FME Cloud and things like Kubernetes and Docker. So if you ever have support questions about those, you'll probably end up talking to me.
Hi, I'm Javita. I can't do alphabetical order. I thought we were doing this by height. I'm so confused. I'm a desktop technology expert. I work with Nampreet and Chris, and we love our new users. You might have seen our name in the community once in a while, so really happy to help.
And I'm Nampreet. I'm also on the desktop technology experts team. Love working with new FME users and helping them onboard to FME and tackle their data challenges.
Do we have Mark Ireland lurking in the wings somewhere?
You do, yes. Did you want me to say hi? Hello, everyone. I'm Mark.
You're there to help. He's sort of the person that if we all get stumped, we can bring in. He's like, call a friend.
Yes. Okay, you hope.
Okay. What's the next slide, Chris?
Alrighty.
Right. So what we wanted to do is just say that even though we've been seated with a bunch of questions, Jovita and I are going to be monitoring along with Mark all the questions that you can chat into us. So don't be afraid. As Jovita says, we love the new users and no question is too basic. In fact, even in the process of prepping this, we all learned a few things. So please chime in and we'll do what we can to try to help you out today live. Brian Nampreet, can you explain this photo?
Yeah, so this is a photo of one of our recent sessions here of the team chatting together. I don't know, it got a little bit crazy at one point there. There's someone flying. I think, Chris, you're you're sleeping at one point
Mark's
too.
Upside down.
Yeah.
Yep. So I think this shows that we're a pretty large team. We like to have fun. And we work really well together. So that's part of why this webinar should be really great, because we're going to put our brains together to come up with some answers for everybody.
You know, I think this looks like that looked like one of those scenes from the old Star Trek original series when the ship was under attack. So you guys are under attack there, I think.
Yeah,
A little turbulence.
a little bit. So part of why we're excited to share our knowledge today is the fact that we do this all the time. Our team really focuses on sharing information that we know about FME because we want everyone using it to be really, really successful. That's our ultimate goal. And so we do that by having as many free resources as possible available to you, including webinars like these. And I want to highlight a few of them for everyone, just so you have a good compass of where to go to. The first one is the FME community, and I'm going to do a bit of a sneak peek here. We are building a brand new version of this community coming out. We're aiming hopefully for the end of this month. It might stretch a little bit longer than that, but coming very, very, very soon. And that's a great place actually to connect with thousands of FME users.
It allows users to connect to over 450 data sources and transform data using hundreds of pre-built data transformations.
We have some audio there.
With FME, you can ensure the data that you're loading into your
Hang on here.
performance.
John is lurking on the webinar. And that was
Oh,
Tomorrow was first.
we should do an intro of Don if he's there.
He needs to make an appearance.
But we
Wait,
heard
did I
his...
mute him? Oh, I think he left. I think we scared him away. Sorry, Don.
Okay, we scared him. That was interesting. I didn't know whose voice that was. It wasn't any of ours. So
Sorry, Brian.
yeah, that's okay. I'm gonna figure out where I was. Oh, I was talking about the community. And what I would say about that is it's a great site where you can ask how-to questions. Our team is there. The rest of the FME users are all there. And getting help and support through that platform is really, really easy. We
You were
also
talking
have
about a
free
sneak
training.
peek.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. No, you were talking about a sneak
Oh, I
peek.
was talking
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
Right. So I just wanted to highlight that we're coming up with a brand new version of that very, very soon. So we're internally super excited about that. We're going to host a webinar to highlight it and show it off in the next, again, month or so. And so stay tuned for that. The other thing that is really important is you can get in touch with us whenever you need to. We're around on live chat, 9 to noon, 1 to 4 Pacific time every workday. And yeah, all of our knowledge and training is completely free, so check it out. Obviously, after this webinar, wait just a little bit to go there, but please do go to our community and take a look. Yeah, I think, anyone else have any other notes there that I may have missed?
Got it all.
Oh,
Okay,
that's
go
good.
for it.
All right, so we've come into our first question. And the first question that came in was, I would like to know how to write out multiple zipped shapefiles where the name for each output zip shapefile is based on the attribute values. And this is a great question. And the answer is to use fanouts. In this case, more specifically a dataset fanout. And let's actually hop into Workbench and take a look at what this would look like. So I have a shapefile just as a reader. We can go ahead and add a shapefile writer. Now, since we're going to be doing a dataset fanout, we can go ahead and leave this blank for now. So we'll just add the writer. And you'll notice once the writer is added, you can set the shapefile writer name here, but you can't access the attributes. That's just because it's not connected yet. So let's go ahead and connect that up to our reader. And now all of our attributes are available. So let's set the shapefile name to the state name. And then we also need to set the data set. So let's go ahead and open that up. Now, this is where you can set the destination folder, and this is also where you're going to specify that it's going to be zipped. So let's actually go ahead and write it to this output folder, and we have to check this fanout dataset value. Now, because we're working with zipped folders, if I was to just simply put the name attribute here in the fanout expression, this would just write out the shapefiles in a folder called the state names. We actually need to add the .zip extension. So to do that, we open up the text editor, and now we can add the .zip extension. When we go ahead and click OK, we can run the translation, and I'll just open it up here in File Explorer, make that a bit bigger. Oh, that's not cooperating. There we go. Whoa. Sorry about that, folks. Going all over the place here. Yeah, so we go into the output folder, and we can see that now there's a corresponding zipped folder for each output shapefile. And inside there, we also have the, I'm actually going to turn off the webcam because I think that's causing a bit of delay. I think that might be why.
Yeah, we can try that out.
Yeah, right. So inside the zip folders, we have the individual shapefiles called state names. Now, if you wanted to go one step further with that as well, because you have access in the text editor to all of these awesome functions like date times and string conversions and all that, if you wanted to make something have a timestamp, you can definitely add that on. So we can go to add a date time format, and inside that we'll add today's date time, and we'll give it today's format. I have my little cheat notes just above of %D, %M, %Y. So we'll go ahead and run that. I'll have to open up this again, and we'll just clear it out just to make sure that we're not doing any cheating here. So we'll delete the contents of that folder. Oops, we will rerun the translation, and it'll just take a second here. And there we go. We've written out all 49 again. So we have the same state name.zip shapefiles, but now we've appended the date timestamp on there as well. So that is how you would do that first bit. Now on to the second question is, where'd my attributes go? And this is also a very common question that comes up quite a bit. Other experts, feel free to chime in with your experiences with this as well. But the most common cases I've seen with this is the answer is the attributes are there, they're just not exposed in the table view. So I'll just hover my mouse down on the table view below. You can see that there's no schema, so there's no attributes that were read in with that file. In this case, we're working with the DWG file, and this is a very common case with DWG because we have a lot of what we call format attributes, and these are able to be exposed in the reader feature types by opening up the reader feature type parameters and going to the format attributes tab. Then you simply just have to check off the exposed parameter, and it will show up in the table down below. There's also another way to expose attributes, and that's with the attribute exposer. And here you can, again, just choose the format attributes, or if you're creating any attribute values based on, if you're creating any attributes based on attribute values, you can also expose these here, and that will make them available in the feature table. Now, there's kind of a second part to this, and the second part is working with lists. Now, lists are a way to store more than one value in a structured way. So for example, if you had a generic text field called fruits, you could store values like apple, orange, and pear, but you can't really store that very easily because it would have to be divided up by a comma or something. So that's where lists come in handy. Lists will store as many elements in a list on a single feature. So you could have one feature that contains a list of 8 elements, and you can access those individually. And going along with lists, we have a ton of different transformers that can help you help build them, concatenate them, count the number of elements in each list for each feature, and explode the list. There's a ton of different options you have here, so it's a very powerful way to work with multiple attributes. And if you wanted to learn more about working with lists and becoming a master at attribute handling, we actually have a training course coming up, and this is where you'll be able to learn more about constructing attributes and using conditional values and working with lists so you can get more familiar with how attributes and list handling works in FME. So do feel free to check out the training page. That's just safe.com/training and sign up for that.
So I'll just chime in a little bit on lists while we're on that topic. When we began, this is Dale, when we began building FME 20 some years ago, we ran into situations where we wouldn't know ahead of time how many of something there was going to be. And so that was where this idea of lists came up. And all of lists are really is just a naming convention for attributes that we just say we're going to use curly braces and put a number in there starting at 0. And that allows us to be flexible. So if you're parsing a string and you don't know how many pieces you're going to get, we'll give you a list, which then has pieces 0, twiddly brackets was the official name, curly braces, 0, 1, 2, 3, like that. And so, yeah, it's a very, very powerful concept in FME, a little bit hard to wrap your mind around. And definitely, if you want to master FME, taking that class that's coming up, I think would be an absolute great thing to do. I'll also say, I'm not supposed to talk futures too much, but inside of FME 2020.1, which is coming out in July, there's going to be the ability within your transformers to know what attributes are floating around there, and you won't have to quite go through the same thing to expose them as Chris just had to do. We're calling that data aware transformers, and so that gives you a reason to look forward to July, and you'll be able to get that inside of FME when you're in feature caching mode. So pretty exciting things there. So anyway, I will get out of the way and let Jen take it from here.
Thanks. So we had a question come in wondering what FME server parameters are. So I guess I'm not sure how many new users we have on this webinar, but just in case you're not too sure what FME server is, it's sort of like the next step from desktop. So in desktop, you would typically author your data workflows, a lot of them that will be showing you how you can do different things in there today. And then if you wanted to start automating those workflows, that would be where FME Server comes in. So you can start to sort of manage a large amount of jobs, you can schedule them, you can get them to respond and run in response to external events. So for example, sending an email in to FME Server would start a workspace running that might be able to process that data. So we had someone write in asking us what are FME Server parameters. So Chris, I think you're still in control, thank you. So this is just a screenshot from our doc page, which lists out all of the different FME Server parameters that are available. So if you're familiar with desktop, on the left-hand side in the navigator, there's a drop-down for user parameters. So there are 3 different types of parameters, which will be published, private, and FME Server. So the published parameters is what everyone who's using desktop already is probably familiar with. So these will be inputs that the person running the workspace can control at runtime. And then private parameters are pretty much the same as published, but they're just sort of hidden from the user. So the user won't be able to put any input into there. Those values will be fixed by the workspace author. And then the FME Server parameters, when you're running your workspace in desktop, these aren't very useful, but these become useful once the workspace is published to FME Server. So you can see there's quite a few here. The doc page that I had on the screenshot on the slides does go through and explain what each of those do. But I would say some of the most useful ones that we see people using would be one like the top one there, so FME Data Repository. So on FME Server, there's a file system. So if you can use these FME Server parameters to reference data in those locations on your FME Server. So there'll be some like that one for your data repository, which is where temporary data is uploaded. And then there are some just for the resource data folder, which would be further down that doc page. And we also have some that people use fairly regularly if people have multiple servers or they upgrade fairly often. And they're doing things like using the REST API or they have job submitters in their workspace. Instead of hard coding in the FME Server IP address or host name, they might choose to use the FME Server parameter for host name. So whichever FME Server is running on, that will generate the parameter value. So it will always be correct and it will always run on that server. So I think if you're interested in them, definitely go and have a look at the doc and then you can see what all of those FME Server parameters do.
All right, so we're going to go improv style now. Jovita or Mark, are there any of the questions that are coming in that that you wanted to just highlight?
There is one that I really liked. It asks, just wanted to know, what kind of users need FME? If anybody would like to. Well, anyone who uses data, really. We started in our geospatial kind of environment where we mostly work with GIS data, but if you're working with like Power BI or other kind of tabular data, it works really well as well. And it also kind of solves bottlenecks in your workflows to be able to automate your workflows and just be able to access data when you need it and in the format that you need it in. Would anyone like to add to that?
Yeah, I think Chris is showing a big list of formats here to speak to your point there, Javita. I think we connect to at least 450 right in the product that is quite extendable. So that's pretty amazing. The other thing I'd say is we work very closely with IT departments more and more and more every day that goes by. And they're using it for all kinds of things that, you know, growing out of our roots of spatial, they may not even be interested in that at all. And so they're using FME to glue systems together and have messages and data pass through those systems to each other. And so it's been a great expansion of what FME is possible or can do.
So there was a follow-up question there about is FME good at structured data or unstructured data? And I'll take a little bit of a stab there. Of course, structured data means that there's some sort of format that's been kind of given to us and we can pick it apart. Unstructured would be more, here's a bag full of things, can you make sense out of it? And so people have used FME in the unstructured case by using various tricks to try to figure out what's what. I've seen people parse invoices that come from scans, for example, and based on where things are and kind of the names of things, they can pull values out. So both things are possible, but certainly if the data is somewhat structured ahead of time, even if it's kind of without much schema, but with names, we can work with that very, very easily.
Yeah, in fact, we did a webinar recently, Dale, the schema drift webinar, which actually touches on that in some ways, because what we were talking about there was what happens when your data changes. How do you make sure you maintain control? And so there are mechanisms like dynamic workspaces that can make working with challenging data a lot more manageable with FME.
Great. So I see one that I feel like I should put Jen on the spot, but I think get her nervous there. So James asked, if you're on FME server and you delete a workspace, a repository, or a schedule, you delete anything, is there any way to get it back? What do you say, Jen?
I was going to say no to that one. I'd say typically once you've deleted it, it has gone. The only way that you would be able to get it back would be perhaps if you had like previously packaged that workspace or data, or I guess most things on FME server, up into a project. Then you would be able to re-import that project, which would sort of bring everything back into FME server. Or if you had created a backup file previously, then you could go and restore that back to your FME server and it would put the workspace back. So some people do have backups regularly scheduled. So if you did accidentally delete something, you wouldn't have to go too far back for that. But everybody's different, so that might not be the case for some people.
That said, this is a good possible future enhancement request, and we can also mention that there is version control for at least some things in FME server, which we're looking to expand. And so possibly if you had version control turned on, you might be able to get it back. Is that right, Jen?
I would have to double check that, but it would make sense, I think. Yeah.
Is there time for one more quick question, or are you moving on?
Go for it.
Someone was just asking about putting photos into a database. If they've collected data and photos in the field, what's the best way to get that into a database? And I think you probably put it into a blob field, excuse me, in a database. But we were wondering if ArcGIS Online can have images in it. Can we put attachments into ArcGIS Online? Does anyone know?
I believe, yes, I believe Trent has published the ArcGIS Online attachments workspace, or it's a custom transformer, one of the two.
Okay, so that will be another way.
Yeah, I also saw an example of Survey 123, another ArcGIS or Esri product being used to upload images into AGOL or ArcGIS Online. The other option, if you're not looking for a GIS solution, would be possibly using FME server to create a server app to upload images to a destination of your choice, really.
And if you're using one of the Esri tools and it is putting the images into ArcGIS Online to begin with, the FME reader for ArcGIS Online for sure can read out the images as well. And I think what happens there is that you get an attribute in FME land, which is the binary encoded or somehow the encoded contents of that image. And then there's things, I think the raster replacer and the raster extractor, they kind of are used to go from that binary encoded thing to a true raster and back again. So those are some tricks up your sleeve. If you're going to go to SQL Server at the end, as Brian said, you're going to need to somehow get that imagery into a blob attribute. Probably the raster extractor would do that, and then in you go. Does anybody want to check if I'm right? I actually didn't check. I'm sure that there is something called the raster extractor. Can somebody verify that?
Let's take a look online.
I was going to say Brian, and I'm going to say but he built this demo maybe last year for World Tour. Did an example like this where we were taking pictures.
Yes.
And it was Esri. Brian can probably talk about that or where that lives now.
Yeah, the graffiti one, is that what you're talking about, Jen?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, we were reading attachments out of there. Yeah, I'm a bit, can't remember
Yeah, I think
exactly
they
all the
show up
details.
as attachments in the ArcGIS Online. There's several attributes that show up when you're working with images. And I think Dale was right. There seems to be the raster extractor, which seems to be seems to work as he's described. So I think you're spot on there.
Excellent. And then, you know what, we'll take one more and then we get back to the show, because this is a question that we're going to get lots of times in the months ahead. Will workspaces that create or that have Python 2.x inside of them continue to run? And what we're trying to do is make sure that the answer is yes. We're going to keep supporting Python 2 as long as we can. But that said, as time goes on, there will be things in FME that will require Python 3. So we are encouraging people to begin the migration process. Officially, Python 2 by the Python organization was quit being supported earlier this year. So really, it's an unsupported globally thing. That said, there's lots of it around. We're going to go and try to be as kind and as good as we can to keep stuff going. But we know that there are going to be, for example, some new transformers in FME that are only going to be Python 3 because the libraries we use are only Python 3. And as soon as there's even one of those, if you're using those in a workspace, you're going to be out of luck with your older code. Your old workspaces, however, we're going to try to let them keep going as long as we can. You will have to do a separate install for the Python 2 because many organizations are banning it. So if you want to use FME with Python 2, you'll have to download another installer and put it in. But we are going to try to let it keep going. But if I was in your shoes, I would look to hire some co-op students and port that Python 2 code to Python 3. So I don't know, support team, do you get these questions very often about the Python 2 to Python 3 and what the migration's like?
I'll just chime in here, Dale. I would say, yeah, we do get questions about this coming in on support about going from 2.7 to a 3 Python.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a bigger deal. And you know, maybe we'll have to run a course sometime or together with one of our partners on some of the tips and tricks for doing that. You can certainly write code that works in both of them, but it is a bit of a trick. But anyway, I think with that, maybe we should get back to the show. Who's up next?
I think it's me. So this is a question actually I get all the time, which is I'm new to FME and what I want to do with it isn't necessarily one of those formats that Chris showed in the big list. What's my options? And I would say actually there is a number of different things that you can look to do to solve that problem and extend FME's reach. And so it really depends on what the system is that you're trying to connect to. In many cases, there's a database involved. And so what's interesting about FME is there's two formats that are basically JDBC or ODBC connectors. And so Chris, I think you're managing this. If you want to click on that first, just link the JDBC one. This is an article that we have in the knowledge base that talks about how to use this format. And basically what you do is you get a driver to that database. Again, it may not be one that we initially can connect to, but then you use the JDBC format. And if you scroll down, there's a giant table of tested databases that we've actually played around with in support. And so lots of stuff. If you go even further there, so there's some interesting ones, Hortonworks, HP Vertica. So Neo4j, actually, I really like playing with that one. Again, all these work by just plugging JDBC through. So that's definitely an option. Again, many even web-based systems, sometimes there's a database involved on-prem that you can connect to. And so that's powerful. But the other big one for me that I see all the time is how do I connect to something with an API? In examples we've seen recently, IBM Maximo has been one that a lot of customers have been asking for. CityWorks is another one. And these great web-based systems or SaaS platforms have APIs that you can talk to. And so right away, FME has an HTTP caller transformer that can get you there. And so, yeah, I think this is just one of those examples where you can build into Workbench the ability to talk to that system. So that's incredibly, incredibly powerful. And Chris, if you want to go to FME for a sec, I just want to highlight how this has been used. So if you type down just CityWorks or work order, either of those two things, yep, the connector is a perfect example there. So this is a custom transformer. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but if you want to just right click it, Chris, and hit edit, I just want to go into the guts of this thing, and you'll see right there, there's an HTTP caller being used to talk to the web service end or the API front end of that. And so that is really powerful. Again, any system you're working with, if it has an API, you are golden. And then, Chris, if you want, sorry, I'm really making you work today. If you want to go back to the slide for a second, there's a few other notes that I think I had. Yeah, another aspect of this is if it's a system that's just local to your machine or an installable system or tool, you can use something like a system caller or even Python, as we just mentioned, to have FME actually call out to it. A few years ago, I don't know, Dale, if you remember this, but Dimitri built some really interesting system caller-based transformers to talk to LAS tools, which is a really neat programming point cloud processing library. And so FME just calls out to the command line, processes the data, brings it back in. So again, extending FME's reach. Yeah, go for it.
And I'll just mention that the key to that was the ability, or at the time we added both the feature reader and the feature writer, which allow us to write out to file formats and to read back in the middle of a flow. And so for Dimitri's tricks, what we do is some kind of a point cloud feature flows in and we say, oh, let's write this out in a LAS file using the feature writer. We then use a system caller with the right arguments, and it goes away and does its thing and comes back. And then we use the feature reader to pick up whatever the system caller created and carry on within FME. So that's a very loose coupling way to extend FME to basically call out to any command line utilities people might have.
Yep. And we'll make these slides available. There's links in here to a great article that talks exactly about how Dimitri did that, and so you can reproduce it on your own. And I had a bit of fun, actually. Well, I'll talk about the FME Hub. So the FME Hub is a great place that is community driven, but we also use it ourselves to store many different formats and transformers here that you can just download right into FME. That's how Chris brought in that CityWorks connector. And so you'll see us adding more and more content here, and as well our customers and partners are doing the same thing. So if your format's not necessarily listed on our main formats gallery, it may already be in the hub itself, which is great. And so whirlwind tour here, but I had a bit of fun with an API. And so Chris, if you click on the bottom, I found an API that was simply talking to the International Space Station and pulling in the exact location of where it is. And so I just put the ability to put my address in, and it goes and it will tell you exactly when it's going to fly over next above your house. I know, Nampreet, your son is really, really keyed into the ISS, and so this might be a tool that he starts to play with in the future.
Totally, it's going to replace my iPhone app.
That's awesome. So yeah, all this is an API they've made available, and I've used an HTTP caller just to talk to it and pass my address in. And it's really, really simple, dead simple. We can make this workspace available as well, just to check out how simple that might be. But yeah, that's a quick tour of extending FME's capabilities for sure.
So I'm going to ask Stephanie to give me a presentation. Let's see here.
While you're doing that, I'll thank Chris for doing all the clicking there. It's a good job.
My pleasure.
Are you guys seeing the right screen here?
Yes.
Yep.
Awesome. So we had a question come in. When adding a new feature class or table to an existing reader or writer for the same feature dataset of a FME workspace using FME Workbench, how do I add the new attribute to the existing reader and writer? When I have done this in the past, a new reader and writer were created. So there's a lot there for sure. I think some of us had different interpretations of this question, and we'll likely, I'll take some time to take advantage of this question to go over some basic FME terminology just to make sure everybody's on the same page with terminology in FME. What kind of threw me off here was the use of attribute here after talking about feature class or table. And we'll get to what attributes are in FME in a little bit. So first, looking at some basic terminology. In FME, we talk about a data set. So I'm going to use an Excel spreadsheet or workbook as an example here to demonstrate each of these terms in FME. The data set in the Excel context refers to the actual Excel file or workbook. So that includes all the worksheets or tables that are included within that one Excel file as well. So the entire file is our data set. When you translate that over into the Workbench environment, you can see that added as a reader or a writer in your navigator. And essentially that's your connection to your source or destination data set. Then the next level down would be feature types. So feature types refer to the individual, in this case, tables within the Excel spreadsheet or these worksheet tabs. So in this Excel file, we have 3 feature types: plants, plant survey, and parks. When we bring these into FME, they show up as these elements here, which we call feature types. So these are all feature types of this data set, the global plant survey data set that we've read into FME. So hopefully that makes sense there. And then the next level down are attributes. So attributes are the elements that help describe your data. So in Excel or in most tabular formats, they show up as column names or fields here. So park ID, park name, region, country in this example would be our attributes. In FME, when you expand the feature type here, you can see a quick view of your available attributes for that feature type. And then the final level that we'll be talking about are features. So those are the actual rows or records in a tabular data set. So in this case, park ID number 3, Jasper National Park, is a feature. And often that if it's a spatial feature, that would be represented by some type of geometry. In tabular data, it would be a row. I hope that makes sense. And now to address the question here, again, feel free to chime in to the other experts in terms of if you guys have any ideas. But the first angle I'll take is I believe the user here was trying to ask how to basically bring in another feature type or table within a data set that you've already added. So in this case, we have a reader that was already added to FME, and we want to add an additional feature type. So the way we do this is using import feature types, and that's you can get that from the readers menu up here. Select import features, you point to your actual data set that you want to import from and select the feature type that you want to bring in. And you can see it gets added as part of the existing reader in this case. For writers, we have a couple options. So if you want to bring in an existing table in this case, you would use the import feature types option. And that would allow you to connect to your data set and bring in an existing table, and that will ensure that you're maintaining the schema that already exists for that data set, for that, sorry, feature type. I get the terminology confused all the time myself. If you want to add a new table or feature type to an existing reader or to an existing writer, the way to do that is to go to writers and click on add feature type. So after you click on add feature type, you'll be prompted to select which writer you want to add the feature type to, and it'll walk you through the process of adding a new feature type there. The other angle some of us took with this question was maybe this user was talking about schema drift or dynamic data sets and dynamic workflows. So we have a couple of resources here. So basically, with dynamic workflows, basically allow you to connect to multiple feature types within a given data set or within the same format with one reader, so with one dynamic reader. And that this allows you to handle different incoming and outgoing schemas when you work with dynamic readers and dynamic writers. There's a great tutorial series on our community. Would encourage you to check that out for sure to learn more about that. And in terms of schema drift, that's often when you're working with dynamic data and the schemas or the data models are changing from your source data set or your destination data sets. We had a great webinar last month that Brian and Dale mentioned previously, going over some tips and tricks on dealing with schema drift. So definitely check out this webinar for more information if that's what the person asking this question was asking. All right, Jen.
Can someone make me presenter, please? I guess I could ask myself. Oh,
no worries, I'm on it.
Thanks. I'm hoping you can see some trees.
We can.
So the next question was, this was about asking what or how you can send notifications from FME server if a job is failing. But then I think the person who asked this question also expanded on this in the comments section of the webinar today. So I'll talk about both things that they were interested in. So for anyone not familiar, this is the FME server interface here. So as I was mentioning earlier, whenever you people move to FME server, it's because they want to start automating their workflows. So the easiest way to do that is using automations, which I'm going to show right now. So the idea here is based on some action, you'll get a workspace to run, which I'm going to put inside here. And then you'll be able to choose your workspace in here. And then so every time you build an automation, you're going to start with a trigger. So this could be something like when an email is received, if a directory has been modified, if data appears in Dropbox, etc. But for this, the user was asking how they can get email notifications if a workspace has failed. So in this scenario, it doesn't really matter what the trigger is, but we just want to know when a workspace fails. So you can see here, at the end of every workspace, there's a success or a failed port here. So in automations, you can really easily decide what you want to do next based on whether a workspace failed or succeeded. So in this case, we're only interested in a workspace failure. So we can go to this node here, the next action, and we can choose to send an email. So we have a whole list here of external actions, so you wouldn't necessarily need to send an email. You can do any of these things on the list. So for this demo, I'm not going to fill in any email details. I'm just going to show you how you can build your email. So you can give it a subject. So in here, I'll just put job failure. If you wanted to be more descriptive, you can get information from upstream. So anything output from the nodes above becomes available as these keys. So for example, for the workspace, you can get different information about the workspace that just ran. So you can get its job ID, you can easily see its status, the status message, what the name of the workspace was if the job ID doesn't really mean anything to you. So you can start to build quite informative email messages going out. And you could also include the log here, because telling someone a workspace has failed might not be that useful on its own unless they're going to go and immediately look in their FME server to find out why. So you can attach the job log, so the person receiving the email could just go and check it out for themselves and decide whether they need to go on FME server and fix something, or maybe it's okay and they're just going to leave it be. So you can also build useful email bodies too. So just like you get inside desktop, we have added a text editor to FME server. So if you want to build nice email messages, I can say this workspace failed and then include the workspace name, ran with a job ID, and put that in there. So once the automation is running, it will actually fill these values in with the right workspace name and with the right job ID. So you can get an as informative email notification as you want. And then when your automation is running, any workspaces that fail will then generate that email to send it. And then one of the sort of follow-up questions we had was, if you don't want to set this up for every email, so in this instance, you would only get that email on failed workspaces where you're actually adding the email action here. If you wanted to do this differently and then maybe every day send an email report to someone with all of the workspaces that failed, you could do that using the REST API. So you would need to build your own workspace that would sort of handle the logic for this. But we do have a FME server REST API call here that would retrieve all of the completed jobs. So you could use the HTTP caller inside a workspace to make this request. And then using something like the tester, you could filter out all of the jobs that failed. So that should be available in here. So you'd have the status, might be job failure. Pull out all of those ones and then make a list. Maybe use a HTML report generator to generate some HTML that you could then pass out to an email action inside automations, and then use that to send a full report of the daily or maybe even weekly jobs that have failed. So that would be one way to do that. So hopefully that answers their question. And then we can move on to question 7.
Would you be able to go back to the webinar slides?
Yep.
If you could click for me, I think it might save a little bit of time for question. Thank you. So question 7 is, how do I read in multiple files at once based on the format or the metadata, like the date? So typically, if you want to read very many files, I would suggest trying the reader first. There are ways like adding a wildcard when you specify the data set to be able to filter by the extension, such as if I'm only looking for CSVs, but my folder is really messy, I can put an asterisk and then .csv, and that will filter to just my CSVs. But another way to do this that I really like is to use the directory and file path names reader, because that lets you read the contents of your folder first with the option to do recursion. So if there are subfolders, read into subfolders, and then decide from there whether I want to filter out anything that I don't want or only the CSV files. And then be able to read in that data set in the feature reader. So that feature reader is actually pointing to a attribute called path Unix. Unix for me because I'm running a Mac, but there's also a path Windows attribute, and that will actually read in the data. And then you can work with that and filter it out, again, by the feature types. So that was just a quick one that's just kind of fun to be able to see your data before you read it in. It makes it kind of quick, but it does add a second step. So I would definitely suggest using the format reader first and seeing if that gives you what you want. And that is question 7.
Jovita, I'll just mention that in between the path reader and the feature reader, I think you can actually inspect, you could put a tester in there to test on the dates basically and throw away the ones you don't want. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Thanks for adding that.
And I'll also mention, as someone who's fought the battles between the / and the / for a long time, you can actually get away with the path Unix on all platforms. So on Windows, it's forgiving. And so that's what I recommend people author with. You know, this is supposed to be a bit of a break for some Q&A. We've got only 10 minutes in our official time left. And so what I think we're going to do is just carry on with the prepped ones. And then at the very end, if there's time, we'll, well, actually, we're just going to hang around. If people want to stay with us, you can hang in there. It looks like lots of you have great questions. There's no end of things that people are up to, and we'll do our best to answer. As well, if you've typed something in and we don't answer it live, we will promise to get back to you. And lastly, this is the kind of thing that goes on in the FME community on a daily basis. And we encourage you to, if you're not already participating in there, to don't be afraid to ask these kinds of questions there. And people from around the world will be answering, like the sun never sets on the FME experts, that's for sure. There aren't only experts at SAFE, let's put it that way. In fact, I know at least one of them is tuned in using a Lego iPhone holder to watch this in faraway Great Britain somewhere. This question, we never actually mocked this up, but what we thought here was that really you can just use an ArcGIS Online reader, and then it will read each record one at a time. And now each of those you can run through an HTML formatter to create an interesting email message if that's what you want, and then pump it into an emailer and boom, 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 off it will go. If you want to combine them all, then you would have to maybe use some kind of an aggregator to join all the results together into one big email if that was your goal. But these are the kind of workflows that we would recommend there. So let's just go ahead to
Dale, that's the HTML formatter is what I used in my space station example to create that output into the browser. So it's a really nice way to pack up information and display it.
And you must have had multiple rows at some point that you were joining together.
Yeah, I was getting a lot of good output from that API. So I was able to use the table parameter, I guess it is, inside that formatter, and it just was really seamless. Yeah.
It just does it for you.
It does it for you.
I think Jovita's
Question 9. Yep. How do I group my tabular data together when I don't have value to group on? So sometimes we make lists and they make absolute sense to us, but when we try to work with that kind of sort of values in a column, that it's a little bit hard to work with an FME. So I'm going to ask if we can go to the next slide. So this is a really fun question. On the right there, you can see my table, and I've got groupings of our teams. The middle one's kind of, I just made some groups, and they're split by row 7 and row 12, where there's just no data there. So this was really fun. Mark has a question of the week on this that you can read more on, and this is actually an answer derived from one of Ebigom's Q&A solutions that I found really elegant, and it's to use the attribute manager. And there's a functionality in there that is to enable adjacent feature attributes. And what this does is it lets that row, so for example, row 8, Brian, can see the previous values or the records after, and you can specify how many. So I can look up 1 or down 1. And using this, we can add some logic to do a conditional value to be able to check that, to be able to check the different values before and after in order to create these groupings. And I learned something new today, actually, in the counter that is really little known, but in the counter name, you can actually do a group by. So now that I've created this first group, which is group ID 1, a second group ID 2, and a third group ID 3, I can actually use the counter name group ID to be able to count from 1 to 6 for group 1, and then 1 to 4 for group 2, and 1 to 5, I believe, for that third group. So this is an exciting one. It'll be in the slides that you guys can explore a little bit more on your own. But this is just a fun one that I wanted to show. And that's it for question 9 for me.
All right, I think we'll keep on going. We'll skip over this Q&A portion and carry on to the next one.
Okay, I think this is me. So the next question is, why am I getting an error when trying to go directly from Collada to LAS or LAS? So what I'm reading here is they're trying to go use the Collada reader and trying to connect it directly to our LAS reader. And why are they getting an error? I wonder if you can go to the next slide. So I thought I would use this question to highlight where to go to find out more about a particular format. So in this example, we're dealing with 2 different geometry types. So Collada, as you can see in the screenshot here, supports surfaces, while LAS is a point cloud format. So oftentimes when you're transforming your data between 2 different geometries, you do want to, or you will need to use one of our transformers to move from A to B basically here. So in this specific example, a point cloud combiner might do the trick, or might be a good starting point to start off with. But in terms of going a little further with this question is, where do you go to find out a bit more information about your specific formats? One of my favorite resources is the quick facts in our documentation. So each of the reader and writer pages in our documentation has a subsection called quick facts. In there, there's a great summary for each of the formats, listing any dependencies for that format, as well as any supported geometry. And in there, you'll get some clues as to why a potential transformation isn't working for you. Is there anything else you want to add there, Dale?
Just that excellent setup here, because yes, FME can handle so many different data types, but not all formats can of course accommodate those. But what we have done over the years is provide, wherever it makes sense or is possible, transformers that will do those data type conversions. And I'll be the first to say that we maybe have some opportunities in terms of being able to help people figure out what they are, because I wouldn't have guessed that I would put a surface into the point cloud combiner and get out a point cloud. So I think that is a bit of a jump, but nonetheless,
yeah, I think you'll have to find a way to get into the point cloud combiner prior to finishing that workspace.
Yeah. So anyway, you can convert surfaces to point clouds, and the point cloud combiner actually does that. There's other transformers for going between these different data types. We've had somebody ask if they can store rasters in a shapefile. Again, you'd have to go through some kind of raster cell value extractor thing. That'd be kind of a crazy thing to do. We've had people store rasters in Excel files before as well. And so, you know, if you can dream it, it can be done. But nonetheless, that's what I would point out. Now, if we go to the next slide, I just use this as a chance to pitch the upcoming webinar. So I'm not sure who's running the slides.
I think Jen
Jen,
is.
are you able to, there?
There we go. So I did say that people wanted to store rasters and shapefiles. We'll probably do that in our, Mark Ireland and I are going to be working on this webinar in the next few days for airing in a couple of weeks. And we'll do a silly shapefile trick where we go raster to shapefile only because it's there and it can be done, and we wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but you will want to tune in if that could be of interest to you. So we are at 9 o'clock. So Brian, as we said, we're going to keep on going. If you have to leave, we thank you for joining us. The recording will be available afterwards, but this is going to be like one of these webinars of attrition. We're going to keep on going until the last slide is done, and then we'll shut it down. So thanks if you have to leave. And I would say, please do take part in the FME community. That's where these types of questions and answers fly by all day and night long. And we're always excited to have you in there. I'm pretty excited about the new one coming up as well. Otherwise, we'll just carry on. And Brian, why don't you take this one?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. The other thing I'd say too, I've been reading some of the questions in the panel today, and they're such great questions. So I'm glad we've had the opportunity to answer those for everyone as we've been going. But what I wanted to touch on here is a good question we got, which is how can I share what I've built with others within my organization? And if you go to the next slide there, Jen, there's a number of ways that you can do this. And other experts, feel free to chime in here, but I've highlighted a few. The simplest that I didn't actually highlight is just saving your workspace and sharing it, emailing it, sending it to somebody over Slack. We do this at SAFE all the time. But there are some really elegant ways to share what you're doing with others within your network or organization. And one of those is just actually having a shared resources folder. And so desktop can actually, you put into the settings, I want to have a shared resource folder on this network drive here. All the other FME users in your org can connect to the same folder, and you can start to share things like custom transformers or workspaces, and it all appears in one nice place, which is really, really handy. A custom transformer, for those of you that don't know, is a nice way where you can pack up a series of transformers that are doing a specific thing and then reuse those again and again and again. And if you're really excited about it and you think it's going to be useful, you could upload that to the hub, which we showed earlier, and make that available to either everyone around the world or just your organization again. And so that's extremely powerful. One thing Jen noted today was server projects as a way to back up data. It's also a really good way to share things. So you could pack up, for example, Jen's automation there and a workspace and a schedule, and that can all be stored in one project that you can give to another coworker. And then I just had a quick shout out there for permissions and roles. So on server itself, you can control who can see what, and that's always effective as well. So you may have certain workspaces that you want a team to use. Well, you could make that all available to them using their permissions and roles. And so I've linked to all the doc on all these things. And so grabbing the slide deck, you can get much deeper into it with some step-by-step in the doc as well. So yeah, great question and answer there, but we're gonna plow ahead. So who's up next?
I think that's me again. If you can make me presenter there, Steph.
Sure. Okay. It's coming over.
Alrighty. Can you see that?
We can. I think.
Am I on the right slide there?
I think you might be on the wrong slide. I think we were question 12.
There we go. Okay.
No reading ahead, people.
I was cheating. So this question is interesting. How do I handle object IDs when I'm performing updates from my ArcGIS Online feature layers to my geodatabase feature classes? So this question is talking about a case where you have a data set that has object IDs, and your database, for example, is is incrementing those object IDs automatically. So your database is taking care of populating those object IDs. And if you're looking to sync one data set to another in this scenario, how do you do that? I just wanted to share one solution. I think there's a couple of solutions on how to do this. A colleague of mine, I think Trent, showed me this a little while ago. So the way I tackle this was to use the attribute remover and a feature merger in a change detector scenario. Let me just go back here in terms of explaining what is happening here. So basically, we're updating a geodatabase feature class with ArcGIS Online layer using the change detector. So the change detector is an awesome transformer which allows you to compare two data sets and identify any changes between the two data sets. To handle the object IDs in this case, just really quickly, what we do after detecting the changes is remove the object ID that's coming from AGOL. So after the change detector, the records that are coming through, the updated port and the deleted port are reflective of the ArcGIS Online object IDs. So we remove that attribute, and then we merge the stream with back with the geodatabase. So you can see here using the feature merger, we bring in the geodatabase back into the workflow as a supplier, and that will add the object ID from the geodatabase to the records that will be eventually written out to your destination geodatabase. So that's one way to handle this scenario. And it's a really good point to mention where it's important to understand your format. So this is a case of understanding how these object IDs are populated and designing your FME workflow to solve these format-specific tendencies. Do I have time to go into change detection and FME DB operations, or?
I mean, we're already over time, so I say go for it.
Sure. So I'll just bring up that workspace quickly here. We had a couple of inquiries about FME DB operations and change detection through the submissions for this webinar. I thought I might as well take advantage of this workflow to touch upon those things. So I mentioned change detection. One way of doing it is using this awesome transformer, the change detector, to compare two data sets, so an original and a revised data set. And what this does is, excuse me, from that comparison, it outputs records that need to be updated, inserted, deleted, or identifying any records that have been unchanged. And what the change detector does is actually sets an attribute. Let me just see here. It's called the FME DB operation attribute. So it sets this with the table handling that's required. So in this case, coming out of the updated port, FME DB operation is set to update. And for the inserted record, it's set to insert. To leverage this, what you need to do in your writer here is to set the feature operation to FME DB operation. This is really handy in terms of streamlining your change detection workflows, not having to, I've seen people add multiple destination feature types or writer feature types to take care of each of the different table handlings. But this is a nice, elegant way to do incremental database updates. go back to the presentation here. I'll pass it over to Dale.
Okay, well, this is this proves we're not afraid to kind of take our lumps. So this was a fairly large file that's being reprojected using a third-party reprojection software, and the tiles are taking long to transform. And so while I don't have a magic bullet or answer here, what I will say is that when you're looking at rasters, the way that FME works, we don't actually do any work in the transformers. So it'll look as though when you put the raster through a transformer, it goes like that. But in general, if it's something like a reprojection or an offset or a clip or some kind of mathematical operation on the cell values, we don't actually do anything. We call it wrapping it. We tell the raster, hey, you're going to get this done to you. And then only when we go to write out do we do the work. And so that's why it'll look like it's taking a long time on the output. And so without having the workspace and kind of digging in, I can't say for certain, but I'm pretty sure that what's happening here is that there's millions and millions of reprojections going on cell by cell. And that's why it's taking so long to transform using this snake grid projector, which is an extremely accurate reprojection thing for Great Britain for following along train routes actually. And so that's the thing. Why we included this was that I wanted to just highlight the fact that both the point clouds and rasters in FME are often somewhat surprising in terms of their runtime behavior because we don't do the work until the end. And again, why is that? If you reprojected and then immediately clipped out a little piece, we would only reproject the part that got clipped out and not the whole works. And that was kind of our design decision back 15 or so years ago. So that's all I'll say on question 13. So let's see what else we have, whoever's running the slides. Okay, SDF. This one keeps coming up in the chats as well. It's worth mentioning that when we talk about SDF, that stands for Spatial Data Format. If you go way back in time, that was a COM-based format, based on Autodesk Map Guide version 6.5. A good Canadian invention, incidentally, came out of Calgary back in its day. And we still support this, although what does deprecated mean? I guess it's there, but it certainly is pretty ancient. Autodesk came up with something later on called SDF3, which wasn't in any way related really, other than being a cousin, I guess, of the original SDF. And so they are totally different formats. The original old SDF requires you to install some COM components, and it only works in 32-bit, whereas the modern one would work anywhere. Now, in both cases, there's no problem if you're on the right architecture. You can read that, and then you should be able to go to SDE. You don't have to make a separate stop. You should be able to go direct. So Nampreet, is there anything else you'd think we should add about those two?
Nope, I think it's just being aware that it looks like SDF might, I don't know if it's one of those formats that allow you to store multiple geometries within one file or one feature type, but if it is, you're going to shapefile, just remember you'll have to create a separate shapefile for each geometry type. There.
And then of course the geometry filter is your friend there in terms of a transformer.
For sure.
All right.
I think we've reached the end.
Wow.
Yeah, we
did. Make sure that I'm not skipping forward here.
So what is that link that you've got there, Nampreet?
Yeah, so this is a wonderful blog that Javita, Chris, and I worked on a little while ago to help some of our new users with resources. There are often times where you don't know where to go for help when you come across an error or an unexpected result, especially when you're starting out. And we have a lot of free resources, as Brian had mentioned at the top of the webinar. This blog here goes through what we saw as some of our favorite resources when we were working through our own workflows, our own workspaces. So have a look through here. This is a good place to go to become familiar with all our resources. You can see our tutorials, training, documentation, webinars, and the community. So. Do we have time,
that
or do we
mean
have
we
any
can
more
just
questions?
sort of wrap up, I guess, with a number of, we'll sample the various questions and that we had throughout. We're 15 minutes over, but I see that 3/4 of the folks are still with us. So thank you for being suckers for punishment and hanging in there till the bitter end. So Jovita, Mark, Ireland, Andrea, any questions that that you saw flying by that you thought we should highlight?
There was one question about refactoring workspaces into a single workspace. I think the user had a whole bunch of different source data sets and schemas they were adding to a single workspace, but after a point it becomes pretty difficult to maintain. And so do we recommend maybe putting it all into one workspace or splitting that all up into several? I think that's a pretty tough question. I mean, you could write books about that. For me, it totally depends on your personal preference, how comfortable you feel putting a lot of complexity into a single workspace. And if you don't feel comfortable with that, I think it's legitimate to hive it off into several copies of the same thing virtually. But do you have any thoughts on that, Dale?
I have a note. It's Brian.
Yeah,
Sorry,
go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say collapsible bookmarks have changed the game for me personally. So in FME, you can actually hide a big bunch of logic into something that's nicely packed up. I think Nampreet might be going to show that. So that can allow you to bring a number of workflows into a workspace and still keep it manageable. I found that to be effective. I don't know about you, Dale, if you had ideas.
Well, I just see that our friend Carl von Stetten from somewhere in California. Hi, Carl. Thanks for being here today. He gave a talk during our virtual world tour, and I don't know if Stephanie can find that and chat out the link, but Carl's talk was super insightful in terms of his whole architecture was to use very small workspaces to do laser targeted things and then group them together using FME servers automations. And so if you have the whole platform, that becomes a nice way to create things that are more maintainable. As a crusty old software guy, I do think that having ways of kind of managing complexity is great. So either use bookmarks and collapse them, or break the workflow apart into smaller pieces and then have something above that to chain them together, just to have less to keep in your brain at a time. Any other good questions?
Let me just have a check. Oh, there was a question about coordinate systems in MicroStation DGN. Now, I'm not sure, but we don't support MicroStation coordinate systems directly. Is that right, Dale?
Yes, you can't read them out. And I think the person was also indicating that they had an offset inside there that was kind of not part of a normal coordinate system. So in that universe, there are parameters on the reader that let you supply a different global origin. This is scary stuff because the reason is in old design files, the coordinates were stored as 32-bit integers. And so you had to have an offset in there. Actually, I think they're 16-bit integers, sorry. And so you had an offset in there that pushed them to the right place in the real world. And a lot of times people monkeyed with that. So anyway, you can create a false offset or a correcting offset inside of the settings of the reader, and then you can tag the reader with the right coordinate system, and that's really the set of tricks. Alternately, use an offsetter once you get in there and a coordinate system setter in your workflow. But you do have to do some monkeying around, unfortunately, with the old MicroStation files.
Yeah, and if you're not writing back to MicroStation, then I'm not sure that the units of resolution even applies once it gets into FME.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone asked, hey, I use Goodle, the open source library, to do things. Can I do these things in FME? And Goodle is a wonderful open source library. Safe Software has been one of the many funders of it over the years. In fact, arguably, we were among the first funders long ago. And so anyway, we've supported and have a good relationship with that group and try to do our part to give back. Definitely, we use Google inside FME. I won't say that we surface every bit of functionality. We hope we add value along the way, but most formats are accessible either directly or through a VRT, which is a virtual table, a virtual raster inside of Google. But nonetheless, in particular, the question was, can we do a BSB, which is a MapTech thing, to GeoTIFF? And the answer is yes, we can. So definitely most Google things should be able to be done with FME, and hopefully we can add value by having some transformers or other operations that make it worth coming to us for. Someone else asked if we have any analytics tools that look closely at the source attributes and detect trends and patterns. So I know that, and I'll get Brian or the team to pipe up around some of the work we've done with our transformers. We are looking at adding more and more of this intelligence into the authoring experience. I hinted before at the data aware business. And so we're looking at how we can make that even part of your authoring experience. But in terms of runtime, looking at data, of course, statistics calculator is there. But Brian, others, what would you say about the various hub-related transformers in this area?
Yeah, I know I can speak a little bit to that. We've been pushing a number of hub transformers around R into the hub, and some of that's coming out of our work with BC Cancer Research, which has been really interesting. So they're trying to do a lot of deeper analytics on medical data, and coming out of that, we're learning a lot about how users want to utilize our technology within FME. And so if we can make that easier in any way possible, and one of those ways is to wrap it up as a custom transformer, we're going to do that. And so we'll be looking at that over the next coming while to make more R-based transformations available in the hub. Yeah, anyone else have any notes there?
I mean, you could
that's fine.
you could say that the NLP transformers might help you to analyze the sentiment of incoming attributes and data, if that would be of interest. And as an NLP analyzer transformer, so have a look for those. That might be of use.
There's a number of web services as well that we recently added in, Amazon Recognition being one that Jen and I used recently, but lots of that is available. And again, if you want to use an HTTP caller like I showed earlier, the sky's the limit in terms of web services out there.
Roll your own.
Yeah.
So okay, I think we're now about 25 minutes into overtime. Does anybody else have any questions that they think are worth highlighting? Hearing none. Again, we will promise if you wrote something into the chat window and we didn't get back to you, the team will be looking at that once Stephanie gives us the spreadsheet later today, and we'll be following up. Otherwise, hop on over to the community. If it's pressing, do feel free to try the live chat during our business hours here in Vancouver. But with that, I think we'll probably just say adios. So let's put on our cameras and give a nice wave if those of us that are still here. Okay, it looks like only 3 of us. Oh, there's 4. I also want to, oh, there's Jen and Jovita. I want to call out Andrea, who's been helping in the back as well. Thanks, Andrea, for being here today. Mark Ireland. Who else are we missing? Of course, Stephanie. Yes.
Thank you, Steph, for organizing.
Yeah, no worries. That was really a lot of fun to see all the questions coming in. I think we definitely, we'll keep this in mind to have future webinars like this. So let us know in the survey what you thought and if you'd like more webinars of this style. Also, thanks to Liz. We actually had some safers and experts tuning in the back, and they were chatting out links to us as well. So thanks to all the SAFE staff on here too.
Yeah. Thanks everybody then for the Safers for making this possible, and all of you for sticking it out till almost 50% overtime. And as Mark Ireland said on one of the questions, you could run a whole conference sometimes in some of these questions, but great to dig in, and thank you all to all of the customers out there for keeping us on our toes today. Boy, this was a bit of a workout, an FME workout this morning, I would say.
Yeah.
My brain is definitely awake.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks,
I
everybody.
just wanted to,
Thank you.
sorry, I was just going to reiterate quickly too. If for whatever reason your question was emailed to us and it didn't get answered on this webinar, do check your email because we will follow up. So thanks again, everyone.
Goodbye.
Bye.